Okay, don't forget second half, you guys have a test, okay? We're going to go ahead and finish chapter 5, and you only have a few more slides to look at for lab 5, and then we'll kind of finish it up in here, and you guys can go study, and at 9:30 we'll start the test. So, okay. All right, so let's pick up where we left off in chapter 5, and this is going to be finishing up the tissues of the body. So, muscle tissue is going to be one, this actually muscle and nerve. This is going to be one that we're going to really dig into deeply later in chapters this semester. So we're going to kind of just briefly go over this. And with muscle tissue, one of the things that I want to point out, because a lot of times when we tend to think about muscle, we tend to think about skeletal muscle. But I want us to recognize and hopefully remember that we're going to have 3 types of muscle in the body. We have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Now, for our purposes in A&P1, we are going to focus on the skeletal muscle. But just remember that there are 3 types altogether. So, muscle's characteristics, it can contract, or what we know as shorten, when a force is placed upon it. It helps to move our entire body. For example, think about our skeletal muscle. It can help pump blood. If we think about the heart, it can help digest food if we think about the intestine, stomach, and so forth, because that's going to be smooth muscle. So like we're saying, skeletal is attached to the skeleton. We're going to find some of it has the attachments to these other connective tissues that we talked about. One thing about the skeletal that we'll learn, it is termed striated and then voluntary, because skeletal muscle is what we voluntarily move. The cardiac muscle is termed that because it is strictly the heart. Okay? So the cardiac muscle, we'll also find that that one has striations. And this is basically telling us a little bit about the structure. And that is, of course, involuntary. We don't control it. Now, smooth muscle, let this one make you think about tubular structures, stomach, bladder, organs, the viscera of the body. This one doesn't have any striations, but once again, it is involuntary. So let's see what let's go back, hold on, because I got a feeling, yep, somebody always turns the volume off. Hold on. Okay, that one's still turned up. Okay. Just a little video here.
Muscle tissue is widely distributed throughout the body. The primary function of muscle tissue is to produce movement of the skeleton or other tissues of the body. This results in body or organ movement, maintenance of posture, communication such as facial expressions and vocalization, control of body openings, and heat production. Muscle tissue is composed of cells called muscle fibers. Each fiber contains contractile proteins that contribute to the properties of muscle tissue. These include excitability, conductivity, contractility, elasticity, and extensibility. There are three types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle is under voluntary control and is usually attached to bones via tendons or other connective tissues. Skeletal muscle fibers, or cells, are long, thin, and cylindrical. Each fiber has multiple oval-shaped nuclei located just deep to the sarcolemma, the plasma membrane of the muscle cell. Skeletal muscle fibers are surrounded by a delicate layer of connective tissue called the endomysium. Multiple muscle fibers are bundled together to form fascicles, which are covered by a dense connective tissue layer called the perimysium. The perimysium contains the nerves and blood vessels that supply the muscle fibers. Numerous fascicles are then collected to form a muscle that is covered by an external sheath of dense connective tissue known as the epimysium. The cytoplasm of a skeletal muscle fiber is called sarcoplasm. The sarcoplasm of a muscle fiber contains long cylindrical structures called myofibrils. Each myofibril is composed of bundles of short myofilaments. There are two types of myofilaments: thin filaments, which are composed primarily of the proteins actin, tropomyosin, and troponin, and thick filaments, which are formed by the protein myosin. The two types of myofilaments are arranged in parallel, and when viewed along their long axis, they exhibit alternating dark and light bands known as striations.
There's the striation.
The dark bands, called A bands, represent the entire length of the thick filament. Conversely, the light bands, called I bands, represent thin filaments only. The Z discs, dark transverse bands at the center of the I bands, represent fibrous protein structures composed of connectin, to which the thin filaments are anchored. The sarcomere is the functional contractile unit of skeletal muscle. It is defined as the region within a myofibril between adjacent Z discs. There are numerous sarcomeres in each myofibril. Cardiac muscle is found only in the walls of the heart and is under involuntary control. Cardiac muscle fibers are short branch cells with one or two centrally located nuclei and numerous mitochondria. These fibers exhibit striations and banding patterns similar to those seen in skeletal muscle fibers. Cell junctions, called intercalated discs, are unique to cardiac muscle. Two specializations within these junctions link cardiac muscle fibers both electrically and mechanically. Gap junctions form an electrical connection by allowing ions to flow from cell to cell, facilitating the spread of impulses that enable cardiac muscle to contract as a unit. Desmosomes contribute to intercalated discs as mechanical junctions that prevent cardiac muscle fibers from pulling apart during contraction. Smooth muscle is located in the wall of blood vessels, ducts, and organs, and is under involuntary control. Smooth muscle cells are elongated, with tapered ends, cruciform shaped, and contain a single, centrally located nucleus. The myofilaments are not arranged in any specific pattern, and therefore do not produce visible striations or form sarcomeres. Instead of the Z discs present in skeletal and cardiac muscle, smooth muscle contains dense bodies that serve as attachment sites for thin filaments. Dense bodies are small protein concentrations distributed throughout the cytoplasm. Typically, smooth muscle cells are tightly packed and arranged in sheets. Their contraction is slow and resistant to fatigue. Like cardiac muscle, some smooth muscle fibers contain gap junctions that spread electrical impulses and allow smooth muscle to contract as a coordinated unit.
So that's the three types of muscle.
Muscle tissue is
We have our skeletal, our cardiac, and our smooth. So this is just giving some of the information that you just saw in the video. It's letting you know there, we've got the skeletal, we've got the cardiac, if we've got the smooth. One of the things to remember is that we have the different cell structures, because one of the things that we're learning throughout this chapter is that the cell shapes are now different. So, skeletal muscle, cardiac, smooth, and you're going to actually look at some of this today. You're going to look at these three in class and lab. So skeletal muscle, one of the things about skeletal muscle, it is a tubular structure. It looks like this long tube. Now, one of the things about skeletal muscle, up to this point, we have learned pretty much that a cell only has one nucleus. This is the tissue of the body that will be multinucleated, meaning that these cells have more than one nucleus. Their striations are very visible when you look at them under the scope, but like I said, we will be getting more in detail in future chapters on skeletal muscle and exactly what those striations are doing. Now, cardiac muscle, when you first look at it, it looks like it's similar to skeletal muscle, and the difference, this time you will have one cell, one cell, one cell, one cell, one cell, one cell, because of, now she pronounced them intercalated, okay? I've always heard intercalated, but I guess, you know, tomato, tomato. So these intercalated discs represent a border between one cell. And that means that the cardiac muscle has one, for the most part, one nucleus per cell. Okay? But like I said, and even though it is striated, note that the difference here between the cardiac and the skeletal, we create branching in the cardiac muscle. So actually, you won't get into the cardiac muscle until part 2. So the cardiac and the smooth is what you'll begin to get more into in A&P2. The smooth muscle, we don't have any of the striations. We have one cell with one nucleus. It usually forms, now I'm not sure if you picked up on it, but the fusiform, where it looks like it's a little thicker in the middle and thin at the ends. All right, this is to create the connections and keep the cells tight. That's a good structure for that, because these are the cells that are making up organs of the body.
Would it be appropriate to describe it like a rope?
For which one?
The smooth muscle?
For the smooth muscle? Well, now see, when I think of a rope, I think of that tubular structure, which to me would be the skeletal muscle. Some people say it might be spindle-like, where you've got two pointed ends and a big middle end, like a spindle. Yeah. So we have our skeletal, we've got our cardiac, we've got our smooth. Like I said, though, we will definitely be getting more in detail with the skeletal muscle. We'll also be getting more in detail with our nervous tissue, which is the cell structure are the neurons. Now, talk about having to change our idea about a cell structure. Neurons will